Well, I've been asked to talk about the outlook for economic growth in the Eurozone. I'm not actually going to go through all the usual boring stuff about, consumption's going to do this and government spending's going to do that and we're going to end up at, whatever it might be, 1.8, 1.7. Rather, what I'm going to do is to concentrate on what I think are three serious structural problems which are going to hold back growth in the Eurozone. And then I'm going to conclude with a few longer-term remarks. But I want to start by putting all this into perspective, if I can get the slide thing to operate, there we are, by showing you, I guess, what you in broad terms already know, but it's worth, I think, reminding ourselves about the relative size of different countries in the Eurozone. Of course, a lot of the countries that have been in the news very prominently recently are tiddlers, as you see there on the left, and that description, I think, applies to Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and a few other countries. Germany is, of course, the largest economy in the Eurozone, but let's not get it out of perspective. I think a lot of people do get it out of perspective and think that its size is absolutely overwhelming. It's not, actually. It's somewhat less than a third of Eurozone GDP, and a combination of Spain and Italy, never mind Spain and France or Italy and France, would Spain and Italy just about get to the German size. And that group of vulnerable countries, I have to be careful of the PC police on this. I was going to refer to the pigs, but whenever I use that word, I get people coming down on me like a ton of bricks. I don't know, the Garlic Belt plus Ireland or whatever. That grouping amounts to a few percentage points larger than Germany as a share of Eurozone GDP. Now, what are these three problems that I said I was going to talk about? Well, they are, briefly, the public finances, competitiveness, and what I'll briefly refer to as the German problem. More about that in a moment. The public finances, government debt as a share of GDP, this is how it stacks up. There are, of course, a few ultra-virtuous members of the Eurozone, Luxembourg there on the far left, but on the whole, you know the story. It's one of profligacy and considerable danger and threat for the future, with Greece there on the far right at enormous levels of debt compared to GDP. Now, those of you who are quite sharp-eyed may notice that the UK appears on this chart as well. Let me assure you that's not because I haven't noticed that we're not in it, nor is it a forecast that we might soon join it, and still less is it a belated admission by our Bootle that we should join it. It's there for comparison purposes only. Now, on the subject of comparison, let me remind you that the reference value for the debt to GDP ratio in the Maastricht Treaty was 60% of GDP, and under Gordon Brown's famous golden rule, the debt to GDP ratio in the UK was supposed to be 40%. So looking at these numbers, you can see some pretty horrific picture. It's interesting that although Germany and France don't figure very large in discussions of the alarming level of government debt, actually both those countries are themselves pretty high. When it comes to government deficits, I can't usefully draw an honest picture, including Ireland. I've foreshortened it, as you can see, because if I put Ireland on the same scale, you wouldn't see any picture for the other countries at all. It would all be squashed into insignificance. But you're talking here about some horrendous levels of the government deficit. So, what are the implications of all this? Well, there are a number of senses in which I think this fiscal position is going to hold demand back. First of all, there's fiscal tightening, which is going to happen in a number of these countries. Secondly, there's the high level of market interest rates, long-term bond rates. Thirdly, there's the effect on confidence. And lastly, there's the danger of default, which will have implications for the banking system as well as confidence and a few other variables. Now, with regard to the size of fiscal tightening, this varies, of course, a lot from country to country, but this is what the European Commission has laid out as the required scale of fiscal tightening in these different countries. And as far as Greece is concerned there on the far right, you're talking about something of the order of 10% of GDP. This is absolutely enormous, and it knocks our own fiscal tightening into a cocked hat. This is bound to have a significant impact, I think, on the growth of demand in these countries.